Thank you so much, Tim, and I'm really excited now for the next panel because it ties in so well. Tim had some really strong points to make about metadata and how critical it is to discovery and compensation. And so this panel is going to tackle that. Data might not seem like the most sexy topic, but as we've already realized, it's critical. So I can't think of a better moderator for this assembled group than the incredibly smart folks here, and Jean Cook, who's been working closely on this topic for FMC through a number of different convenings and people. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jean for a panel about metadata.
Is that all the enthusiasm you can muster for a panel about metadata? Because what you just did now is how I feel about music metadata. As Kristen mentioned, I'm Jean. It's true. I'm Jean Cook. I'm the Director of Programs for Future of Music Coalition. I've got a panel of extremely smart and very esteemed guests who are going to talk to us a little bit. Each one of them has a slightly different angle on the metadata piece. I was very interested in exploring a conversation today about data keepers. Who are the data keepers in our industry? What do they track? And how do they work with artists? Certainly, folks like SoundExchange and Pandora and the AFM SAG-AFTRA Fund do not exist in a bubble. What they do is they work in collaboration with artists. And hopefully we'll be able to get at today a little bit about how that works. So we're very, very fortunate because Dennis Dreith from the AFM SAG-AFTRA Fund and also the Secondary Markets Music Fund has been very gracious, and he's going to be doing a presentation which is an internal tour of the workings of his fund, the data they collect, and what kind of oversight artists have over their work. So I'm just going to turn it over to Dennis.
Well, thank you. So, there's an old saying about someone who was like, dying of thirst, water, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. And sometimes I feel like we're a little bit like that. It's data, data everywhere and not a bite to share. And, but we started to change that. And so I want to start with a little bit of talk about some of what we do. The AFM SAG-AFTRA Intellectual Property Rights Distribution Fund, like many things that are ever associated with unions, it has like the longest title you could possibly imagine. So, but I'm assuming that probably a lot of people actually haven't heard about the fund, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background. What we do for non-featured performers, what SoundExchange does and what ARC does for featured performers. What that means is we actually have the smallest piece of the sort of intellectual property rights pie and the largest group of people to identify and pay. So obviously data is really important to us. And so what we have are a couple different divisions. We really are divided into a sound recording division and a newly formed audiovisual division. Sound recording came first. We also have that we have to manage a symphonic division, which is very small. But these are all three very complex pieces of the pie. And I'm going to start a little bit and go through what's in the sound recording division. About 14 years ago, I inherited this fund when I took over another fund. It was a tiny little thing. We had about $200,000 or $300,000 set aside, and there was absolutely no way to distribute the money. And all we had at that point were we had monies that were owed from Audio Home Recording Act, and we were owed some money from Japan. We hadn't even collected the money from Japan. Altogether, we had the AHRA monies, and we started with that. And we still couldn't make a distribution, and then the monies from SoundExchange for the digital performance rights really had been held up by the car parent. So there was money there, but there was really nothing to distribute.
Hello? Sorry. Could I just stop you for a second? I wonder if you could explain what Japanese rental, are you going to do?
Yes, I was going to. So what happened is that these are, and part of what I get about data is to show you what strange and disparate different types of things are. The money we got from Japan was for records that were rented in Japan. So in Japan, they actually rent records like we rent DVDs for movies. So we had a very small piece of money, and these are U.S. records rented in the Japanese market, and there was monies collected on that. So we had a list of data that came from that. And of course, and we had Audio Home Recording Act monies, which were private copy monies. These were very, very small. And I want to give you a sense of what kind of challenges we had. in the beginning. When we got the next payment, which still was not enough to distribute, we got a whopping $187,000 was the first payment that we got for digital performance rights. And that sounds like a nice amount of money, considering we only had about $300,000 so far in our other two sources. However, that $187,000 covered 500,000 discrete sound recordings. And if you can imagine how many non-featured performers were on that, even if there was only 2 or 3 background singers and 4 or 5 session musicians, of course it's not the case that maybe have as many as 10, 20, even 100 musicians on a single recording, you can imagine the millions of performers. So we actually had to start finding distribution mechanisms, come up with systems by which we could actually distribute to a finite universe of sound recordings. Then you add to this complication that we now began to negotiate with foreign collecting societies to try to make the pie a little bit bigger in all different foreign countries. And we added to that exclusive license monies, beginning to get the idea that we have a lot of moving parts to this. It becomes a very, very complicated fund to deal with. And those deal with now all the different sources that comes from. We come from webcasting, subscription services, broadcast royalties in some limited fashion in foreign countries, and of course digital radio. We have a wonderful, we're protected here for digital radio. The problem is that there is no digital radio in the US, so no money flows from that, but when it ever does, we do have a right here for that. And of course we also have the monies that come from private copying, which is also a shrinking market. And that covers all of these different countries here. I'm not going to go through each one of them with you, but you can see how many different places this covers. And that's set the table for the sound recording. And the interesting thing about our fund is, I hate to say this, but it's somewhat of a Frankenstein kind of creature. And you see, we had all these little components that came at us one at a time, and we had virtually no resources. So what happened is the fund began to develop computer resources in any way it possibly could and collect data in any way it could. Understanding that what we would get in terms of data that we would capture is somebody would send us a list of a playlist in their country, and that would be comprised of the various sound recordings that have been played and some kind of a weighted formula for those sound recordings. And what that would include would be the name of the artist and the name of the sound recording. Wouldn't even tell us which version of the sound recording, just a sound recording title, which might be the live version, it could be the studio version, it could be any number of versions that were recorded. And we had to capture that. And we developed a computer system for that, which is really a very, very simple and cost-effective system based on an access system, but it was one that was going to soon outgrow. It wasn't long after that we actually negotiated another set of rights for the audiovisual rights. And right now we exist only in Spain, the only country that actually pays us. In the US we don't have an audiovisual right for motion pictures and television programs. They do in every place else in Europe. However, most places refuse to make a payment to US artists because we have no reciprocity. In other words, no neighboring rights. And I know in the last panel I talked a little bit about the need for other types of rights, how much we need a terrestrial right in sound recordings. And clearly we need to have other rights protected. And audiovisual is a huge area of unprotected rights for US artists. To give you an idea of this, we collect just the sound recording portion. This doesn't cover the people on camera, but just the underscore. From Spain, we get about $4 to $5 million a year, and that covers featured and non-featured performers from one country. So you can imagine if we were able to collect from every country and had a right in the United States, how much money that would mean to all of the performers who have, sound recordings licensed into movies. The underscore itself would be tremendous. However, once again, this is a very complicated area, and I'm not going through this just to bore you with how complicated it is or how tough my job is, but I want to give you a sense of the types of information that comes in and what we have to do with that, so you get a sense of why we need more data and what really happens to that data. So the audiovisual division has yet another computer system. So we now have an unusual situation where we have one fund with two computer systems that we have to make those two systems talk to each other. We have two main divisions. They have to talk to each other, and we have to have some mechanism to do that. We have one that's what's called an access database, and I really don't know how much technical information people want, but the other one now is this one is on a mainframe, a very large system that we're able to obviously had more resources to put into this. Let me give you a sense of how complicated this universe is of this. So the Audiovisual Fund is actually divided. What we do is the first aspect seems fairly simple. We get a universe of titles of movies that have been played on Spanish television or exhibited in the theaters. We get a list of all those, and it wouldn't be so bad if we just had to identify the productions that were U.S. productions. But of course, that's not exactly what happens. We have to identify every performance in a motion picture that has a U.S. performer on that. So what that means is, for example, there might be a film scored in London, say a James Bond movie, but that may have one sound recording recorded by U.S. performers. Or it may have a sound recording even by a foreign artist that has one non-featured performer. We have to find that one person, calculate their share, identify them, and be able to pay them. But that's on the usual thing. What happens is we take the universe of motion pictures that have been played, and really there's two types of elements that comprise a motion picture score. There's the underscore, that's the music that's written for the film, the original score, where people went and perform that. And then there's also sound recordings that are licensed for use into that. So we have two components of that. We then take the total minutes of music that are on the underscore portion and the total minutes in the sound recording portion, and that becomes sort of a pro rata share combination of those. To make matters even more complicated, we have a pro rata share based on each of those, as I mentioned, and then what happens is each of those different pools get split up somewhat differently. In the sound recording portion, we have artists that are paid as either featured or non-featured performers. And on the underscore, we base on a kind of a role performance, whether you're a conductor, a featured soloist, and so on and so forth. So just give you some idea how complicated that is. Once again, the sound recording portion is split at a 60-40 split based on the laws in Spain, where we have a roll code for all the other performers. So we go through all of that, identify those people, and then we actually pay them. So that's the main components of the two different funds. We also handle the symphonic division, and that's also another creature that's a totally different thing, because what happens is under U.S. law, the symphony orchestra themselves, the members of the orchestra, are considered the featured performers. I'm not going to really go through the symphonic stuff because I think I've probably lost everybody with this, but the point of this is that the area that we really have to deal with, not only are the royalty collections themselves and the allocations extremely complicated, but the need for information to find each and every person, and also to find the uses of that music. So kind of that's the background I want to give you. And I want to also state that this is very similar to all the other organizations. We just happen to be sort of an unusual kind of universe of that.
So can you just clarify, Dennis, for a minute, that what you're doing is you're distributing money based on rules that are set by other people? That's
correct. We first of all, each understand, I don't want to get too complicated here, but every country that has a performance right has its own set of rules and regulations. In Japan, as I mentioned, we collect money based on record rentals. The types of royalties paid, whether we get private copy money, certain broadcast money, each of those countries has some set of regulations that they apply to our own collections, how the ratio between featured and non-featured, who constitutes a featured performer, who's a non-featured performer. Each of these things are set by every country. So we have to not only track the data in terms of the performance data and also the performers data, but we have to keep track of each one of these sort of the rules and regulations, by the various copyright laws in each one of these countries. So it's, it's an enormous task of data keeping. We tend to think of data as more like simple lines of just information, the performer's name, what they played, but there's so much more to it, in terms of the laws, regulations, every country. All these things comprise data. This is all the universe of data that we have to deal with and juggle.
So would it be accurate to say that background performers who work in television or film or on recordings, and is this just union musicians or is it any kind of musician?
Well, what happens is for most of the countries out of this country, you can only collect and pay for somebody based on a mandate. So either you have to have a person have an assignment of rights directly to the Performance Rights Society or the collective, or in the case of our organization, since we work on behalf of the American Federation of Musicians and SAG-AFTRA, anybody who's a member of those two organizations, we're allowed to collect for them on a foreign territory. However, in the U.S., the way the copyright law is written here, we're mandated to collect on behalf of union and non-union performers alike. So, which makes, of course, our record keeping and our search for data much more complicated. If we're just union recordings, we'd be able to at least look primarily to the union session reports and be able to find that. Understanding that we'd still have people left off of contracts. We know just not going to have a universe that's going to be 100% complete. But clearly having the mandate that we have to treat non-union performers in the same right means, especially in the areas where there's very little union penetration, the hip-hop area where there's very few union contracts that are filed, and also people using aliases and, sort of alter egos as part of their performance persona, it becomes extremely difficult to locate and identify each of those people. So I don't know if we have time to go into the some of the more technical aspects. I don't know if we really have sort of the interest here, but we have a lot of information. If there's questions about it, we can answer about how the data structure is, what the computer systems are like. I don't know if that's what we want to get into at this point.
Well, I wonder if maybe we could consider for now, because what you've just demonstrated very clearly and in an overwhelming way.
I think everybody, I put them to sleep, I think is what we've done here. I think I saw the eyes glaze over. And
sure, well, there's hundreds of income streams that are generated on behalf of background musicians and performers for film, television, and recordings all over the world. And what it sounds like to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that all of the people who have to collect that money are like, okay, well, we've collected it, but when it comes to distributing it, they just kind of knock on your door and leave a sack on the doorstep, and then maybe like a grocery list of who it might belong to, and you kind of have to take it the last mile, right. And you have to do that for hundreds of different kinds of uses.
It's almost good. We get it just almost exactly as you described without the laundry list of who it belongs to. We have to kind of sort of divine that from what we get out of this. I also want to give you a little bit of a perspective of what this entails. In our database, we have right now 140,000 non-featured performers. That doesn't mean that we give a check to every one of those people every distribution, because it's a moving target. So if we pay 12 to 14,000 different individuals on a distribution, that's probably about the right number. We also have a database that's probably about 50,000 sound recordings that are lineup complete, meaning that we've researched all of those. But it's the task is almost unimaginable, because the statistic I have is that every year in this country, commercially viably released are 150,000 different sound recordings in our country alone. Now, we're clearly the biggest market on the planet, but still that shows you of all those that come out. So if we have 50,000 sound recordings researched, we're so far behind. Now, of those 150,000, the majority of those won't have a commercial success, but there's still a potential for that. On an average distribution, we probably research and make a distribution to about 20,000 sound recordings. So meaning that we're trying to catch up with that. Now that means some of those are repeat, performances. We might have some recordings that have been a part of the last 4 or 5 distributions, some that are just the first time. So,
and
but
how
it's
much
a
are you
huge
distributing
volume.
a year? And how much are you distributing a year?
We're doing right now, we're caught up to, we're doing about $12 million a year in terms of distributions. But we're about 2 or 3 years behind. The goal will be close to, we've now collections are about $30 million a year at this point. So by the next 3 years, we'll probably start to get caught up to that, where our distributions are going to be doubling and almost tripling from what they are now. So meaning that what we're doing right now, we just finished distributing monies through 2009 and part of 2010. So you can see we're about 3 years behind, and the big years in terms of money are just ahead of us. So, but if that means we're distributing now in our 2009 distributions about 20,000 sound recordings, that's going to probably have to double over the next few years. So it's going to be huge. But so we will anticipate that our distributions by the next probably 4 years from now will be at the stage of where it's about $30 million a year. And hopefully by that time we'll be collecting about $50 million a year. So we're still going to be woefully behind on that. So the challenge really with the whole data processing and metadata challenge really is to be able to get money out the door faster. We don't want to hold on to money. There's nothing for us. We don't gain anything by holding on to anybody's money. As a matter of fact, we want to get it out the door as soon as possible. But there's a logjam. We have money coming in. It's a huge task to research each one of these things, which is probably, I think we're going to hear from a lot of us. The discussion I've been having is how can we automate this? How can we get metadata attached to every sound recording at the source? We're going to become crushed under the weight of this fund if we can't get to the point where we need data to become, electronically, to flow quickly, so we can process that sooner. And that's the challenges that we face now. Right now, things are coming at us so quickly, which is great. Money's coming at us in a fashion we never thought possible. Sound recordings are being used in ways that we never envisioned, and they're also not just being used on new sound recordings. We find that an incredible use for all kinds of recordings. The one thing about the internet is it's reached a niche market for just about everything. We have huge distributions we find on what I call legacy recordings. Some of the classic Motown records from the 50s, late 50s, and early 60s have a huge life, both here in Europe, providing like an income for people who really had no other income. I can tell you stories about people who were living on Social Security, and the payments they now get from what we have for them have created a whole lifestyle for them that they never had before. So these are the challenges, and so the point is that the metadata and the data that's associated with these recordings has to begin to flow in ways that we don't have now. To sit here and manually research each of these recordings one at a time has been a way to it's kind of a Band-Aid we've been able to do to get things to the stage where they are right now. But we're now at a crossroads where that cannot happen any longer. We'll be so far behind, and I think it'll be the case for all of us. I don't think I'm saying anything that's not true of every other organization. It's probably more so for us because of the volume of performers per recording. And so it makes it that much more complicated, and why it makes us a desperate search on our half to really be able to partner with other people. And where I said it was data everywhere, but not a byte to share, we're at the point where we have to be able to share those bytes now if we're going to be able to have a viable way for the non-featured performers to make an active living going forward.
Well, this is definitely an extremely difficult area. You guys are doing absolutely heroic work. I wanted to point out, though, that you've also had some major successes in the course of the fund, being able to distribute a lot of money, but you were talking, some people talk about getting a lot of the old records, the legacy records that are on paper, getting the machine readable. I mean, that's one of the things that you guys were able to accomplish.
It's true. We actually now at this point have, I'd say, like a database in terms of, we actually now get called by a number of the record companies to provide them information from their own records, from some of the legacy recordings. So in some ways, we now have the only repository of, at least in terms of the legacy recordings, we have certainly the beginnings of the most complete database available for those recordings. So hopefully that we'll be able to maintain that go forward, but to be able to keep up with the flow going forward, it is just clear that things have to change.
So I know that you prepared a bunch of slides, and then we didn't get to go through most of them. Are there any slides that you particularly like that are kind of further down that we didn't get to that you want to show? Maybe one or two?
I think at this point, I think we've given everybody a pretty complete picture. I'd hope to give you a real picture of what the actual data processing looks like, but I'm not sure there's really an interest at the moment for that.
Are you guys interested in seeing how data processing goes? Oh, you have questions. Okay, well, maybe we could do a couple of minutes of questions. If you're going to ask a question, though, because we are webcasting this, we are asking people to go down to the microphones.
Thank you for sharing that information. A lot of people don't even know and really understand what SoundExchange is. A lot of artists don't even know that they have money waiting for them. And understanding what SoundExchange pays for, right? Digital performance of the sound recording, right?
Do you have
So
a question?
my question is, basically with the data, like you're talking about data and the difficulty that you have, I notice when you sign up, you give them your list of music, the songs that you have, right? But is not a requirement that you continue to update? Is like there a registration system where you, like ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, where you submit the new songs as you do them? A way that the artist and the sound recording copyright owners can make it easier for you by continually updating their information, like if you're on a performing rights organization site as well.
So, well, I'm going to let Chris talk about the SoundExchange portion. What we have, but we're actually different. We work in partnership with SoundExchange. We do for the non-featured performers what they do for the featured artists. But in our case, you don't have to sign up. And that may be good or bad. I mean, there's some people who feel that having to register makes you take certain ownership and a responsibility for your work. On the other hand, we do it for you. So whether you register with us or not, if you have a recording that you worked on as a non-featured performer, and it becomes part of the survey of their covered recordings, we'll hunt you down and find you. And one of the things we do, by the way, and I encourage anybody here who has worked as a non-featured artist, please visit our website, raroyalties.org. There's a very large list of unclaimed royalties there. There's also a way to look up, if you find yourself on that name, you can find a list of all the songs you're credited with. What happens, unlike we don't really maintain a full repertoire of everybody of what you've done. What we do is we research the sound recordings that are used in the marketplace that are part of our survey, and we research those fully. Just that way we're not researching records that aren't generating a payment. I wish we had enough staff and resources to do more, but that way we focus clearly on only the recordings that are there. So, but SoundExchange for featured artists, it's imperative that you register and keep up to date with that. The more help every one of you can give all of us here, the better off we are, the better we can serve your purposes. And I do have some of our computer people here. If we have specific computer questions, we can call on them, and maybe if we have time at the end, we can go through some of that.
She did hit on one of the big problems in this space, and that is that the Berne Convention in the 1960s was passed, a treaty that says that you can't require registration as a condition of copyright. Now, the Berne Treaty doesn't really say that. It says you can't require it as a condition of copyright for non-citizens. Brazil requires anyone who makes a sound recording to get an ISRC code, an International Standard Recording Code, for that recording. But by and large, we operate in an area that by treaty says you don't have to register, which creates a kind of disincentive or causes people to neglect this duty. But the fact is, if they don't register, they're not going to get paid.
Well, the fact remains that in the United States, if you want to get paid for your performance money, you do have to register with ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC if you're a composer, and with SoundExchange if you're a performer.
I'm saying I agree with you on that, but I am simply pointing out that we are lulled into a sense of complacency by an international treaty that says you don't have to register in order to have a copyright. Now, there are good things about that treaty, that it's copyrighted the moment you make it, the moment it's fixed in a medium. But it's important for everyone to understand that in order to protect people, in some ways from themselves, we said you don't have to register. But that's created a regime internationally where less people register, simply because it's a voluntary act.
Okay.
And it being voluntary leads some people to be complacent and then wonder, where is my money?
That's a good point, Jim.
Yeah.
Thank you. Since we were talking about SoundExchange, maybe that would be an appropriate segue. We can turn things over to Chris Yorks, and I'd love for you to give a quick overview, well, first of all, in response to some of the things that you saw with Dennis's presentation, kind of like what's similar with what he's doing and what's different for SoundExchange.
Sure. So SoundExchange is the digital nonprofit performance rights organization in the United States. We collect digital performance royalties from non-interactive streaming services, and we distribute them to the copyright owners of the master recordings as well as the artists who performed on those recordings. We pay 50% to the copyright owner and 45% to the featured artist, which is distinct from the non-featured artist that Dennis represents. We also pay 5% to the AFM SAG-AFTRA Fund, which he then administers. SoundExchange currently has in excess of 90,000 registered artists, and upwards of 20,000 registered copyright owners. And this year, we're going to be on target to distribute a little over, or a little right around $600 million to those copyright owners and artists. So it's not insignificant money that we're dealing with here. To address the woman's point earlier, we do collect metadata at the point of registration from our copyright owners and artists. As part of the registration process, to collect money from SoundExchange, we ask you to please tell us about any recordings that you own the copyright to or have participated in the recording of. You know, we get reports of use from our licensees, our digital services like Pandora, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, a host of others, and we perform matching activities to the repertoire that is reported to, or provided to us as part of those registration activities. And really, this lets us know, what are you eligible to collect for? If you're a copyright owner, obviously we want to, be aware of your entire catalog of recorded content that you control. And if you're an artist, anything that you have performed for in any kind of featured artist capacity. So, and, admittedly, we haven't always done a fantastic job of following up with artists to, solicit them for their newly recorded materials. So one thing that my department as the head of repertoire management is aiming to do is correct that. So we are going to be performing more outreach activities to copyright owners, to featured artists, and institute process by which we're constantly being made aware of your new copyrighted works that you could be eligible to receive payments for. So if you haven't heard from me yet, you probably will soon.
Just a quick survey, because I always do this. Every time I'm in a room full of musicians, I assume some of you are musicians. Can I get a show of hands of how many of you are recording artists? How many of you have played on records that are currently being webcast or played on Sirius? And of those of you who still have your hands up, how many of you are signed up with SoundExchange? Okay, just wanted to make sure, because if you are in that category of people who has recorded and your music is being played on Sirius or on web radio, that is one of the things that many people don't understand, which is that they do need to sign up with SoundExchange and let you know who they are and what you've done.
Yes, you do need to register just because we need to know who to pay and how to pay you. But registration, we've gone to great lengths to make it as seamless and painless as possible. So I would encourage all of you who could potentially be eligible recipients of royalties. It's free, it's easy, it doesn't cost you anything. It only takes a few minutes. So please get out there, tell all your friends who are also musicians or controllers of copyright to just take the time to register with us. We could very well have money for you.
So can you talk a little bit about the data that you get? Because when we were talking about about the AFM SAG-AFTRA Fund, we were saying sometimes people will just leave them some money and a few scribblings about who they might be giving it to. What kind of information do you have about the royalties that you're distributing, or what form does it come to you, and who gives that information to you?
So from the service side, from our licensees, the online services who are playing the content, the statutory requirements for reporting are pretty slim. They're essentially required to, or asked to provide 5 data points on performed content. Artist, track title, album title, label, as well as it can be determined, and if possible, ISRC code. And that's it. And on the basis of that, we have to then determine who are the eligible royalty participants and direct those monies accordingly. So the more, I guess I would say that the more information, not only limited to those 5 explicit data points, but any other contextual information about copyrighted releases, recordings, anything else that's made available in any commercial or promotional space is of great value to us, because we literally have to, match, sometimes by manual brute force, this limited set of data against the, what we consider to be the source repertoire metadata as provided by people who control copyright and who perform the recorded works. And making sure that we get this in a timely fashion makes it easier for us to get the money out the door faster. and allows us to cut our costs and pass more of this money on to you guys because we don't have to put it toward our overhead.
Okay, Bruce, did you have a question?
Well, it's kind of a question and an observation, and I have to admit that I've worked with Dennis to a degree. I'm on the board of the AFM SAG-AFTRA Fund, but I've followed this for quite a while and researched it quite a while, and what baffles me about this whole equation is, and I'm not just talking about anybody in front, but nobody's really talking to each other about the metadata equation. This is an easy situation. I mean, labels now, anything I produce for a label or anything, any of my producer friends now have to have metadata for all the recordings that are done. But they don't have to give the metadata to SoundExchange. And then SoundExchange, all you have to do, in all fairness, and I mean, obviously it's a little more, but in simple terms, all you have to do is figure out who the artist is and who the record label is, and split the money there and give 5% to Dennis's fund, where he's got to figure out the myriad of just all the musicians that are on. There may be 20 musicians that are on a record, you know, 10 years ago, and nobody knows who they are, so you got to call people, you got to do this. Why aren't we having a discussion in this country? And I know people are talking about it, but what in your opinion, what is impeding the unified database where the labels will start freely giving? Is this once again, this lack of transparency issue? Nobody wants to do anything? Why isn't ASCAP and BMI, why isn't everybody just saying, hey, we're going to put this little code on everything, tell who the engineers were, who the players were, who the artists were, who the writers were, et cetera, and start doing this worldwide?
I'm going to let Dennis respond to that very briefly, but then I would like to give Mike Fink a chance to present before we get into a wider discussion in which I anticipate Jim is going to be very active. So we'll start with Dennis.
Well, you know, it's a great question, Bruce. And what happens is there's a great deal of sharing. We work closely with, you know, with ASCAP, with BMI. We share with SoundExchange. There's we can share among ourselves quite easily, but the biggest problem here, you've hit the nail right on the head, is there's no requirement on the part of the labels to share that with us. It is not quite that easy because part of the problem is that the labels don't always have it. And what they have is, for example, if they produce the record, they definitely have that. There's still a lot of records that are produced independently. They buy the record and we're just gaps in the information. So I don't want to paint the labels as the only culprit here. But you know, so there's two problems. One, they don't always have all the data, but that shouldn't stop them from giving us the data that they do have. And there's a huge problem with that. We don't get that either, and it's because it's not mandated. And you know, I don't want to say that it's all the lawyer's fault, but it's all the lawyer's fault. You know, because what happens is that, you know, there's always, you know, we do live in a very litigious society, and it's always afraid of, you know, we can't do that. The attorney's job most time in these situations tell you the reasons why you can't do something or shouldn't do something. So we're really precluded from getting that. So we've got to get past that. We've got to create a culture where we're sharing everything, where it flows two ways. One of the things we've been talking about is trying to have something that we give back to the labels. We'd like to share the legacy data with them so we can get that in exchange. So it's not just a one-way street, but that it is a problem. There's one group that's holding on to the data, that has the data, that's not sharing it, and it's got to be either mandated or find some way that makes it more attractive for them to share it than not share it.
Great, and with that, we'll switch over and talk a little bit about the data that Pandora receives and what you generate and what you share.
That sounds good. As you guys may see by your programs and by the name in front of me, I'm Mike Fink. I'm the Artists and Label Relations Manager at Pandora out in Oakland, California. But my music career, if you will, actually started in the city we're in today, Washington, D.C., since I don't know most of you in the audience. I know a few of you, but not most of you. Wanted to give maybe a 60-second overview of what got me to the summit here today. I worked out of college at WHFS, where I fell in love with Tim Quirk's band over there, if he's still there. I got a big bear hug from him once, and I'll never forget it. Not in a bad way. I love Tim's music. Too Much Joy is awesome. I listened to your CDs and probably till they stopped working. So I was at HFS for quite a while, and then from there I was managing artists that I was getting interested in DC. And after a while I went to a nonprofit and then started a record label, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary next month. And then I went to the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts and produced shows there for about 5 years. And in between stints at the Kennedy Center, I actually worked at the Future of Music Coalition. So this is my third summit, one as someone getting information as a record label owner, one as working for FMC, and then honored today to be part of this panel, which is why I'm here to tell you about Pandora. And I wanted to give that little background because for those that raised their hands that were artists, I was an artist too. I guess I skipped that part, but I was an artist too. We played the Black Cat a few times over on 14th Street, tour managed and did artist management. So for data, I kind of see why it's so valuable for artists because I used to be one and I still work with artists for my label and give advice to artists all the time. At Pandora, if you don't know, the company was started by musicians. It was founded by musicians with an outlook to help facilitate working musicians and develop artists. Most of the first employees at Pandora were musicians because Pandora started with the Music Genome Project. The Music Genome Project actually takes data from a very granular point and we analyze music on a song level, went up to 450 different traits, what we call genes, just like the Human Genome Project is the Music Genome Project. So from that point, the data starts to trickle in to a point now where we've done 1.2 million songs by ear with these trained musicians. Some of these musicians actually are on the road now. The drummer for Booker T, the bass player for Edward Sharpe, Emetic Zeros, the bass player for Tune Yards. So it's a company that still has its roots and foundation in music very firmly. And when we get this music, it obviously then goes out through the genome to the 70+ million people listening to Pandora every month. And that's where we get all the thumb data, which interacts with the genome and helps determine what you're going to hear next. And from that point, with the 70 million plus people, the 30 billion thumbs that we've had, the 36 billion hours a month we're now streaming, that's a lot of data, and that's a lot of data points. So when we have artists come by the office, we get to share some of that information with them, and we get to look at what their top markets are, what their top songs are, and where in the country they're doing well. Get all kinds of feedback from artists about cities that never played before, that they all of a sudden see, wow, I never thought about going to South Dakota, but now I'm going to South Dakota. So we've been able to really help artists when it comes to tours. Some artists make comments like, wow, I know what my next video is going to be because they see what the data is and had no idea what a certain song off of their current record is actually trending really well. So we're not able to quite share that. We are transparent whenever any artist comes by the office and share them everything we can, but we're not able to scale that at this point. But that is something we're looking to do, and as you listen, there becomes more data for us to share.
There's another aspect to your relationship with artists. So in addition to the Music Genome Project and also with the data for artists, I believe that you also work with artists and encourage them to submit their recordings to you directly. So that's a point at which they're giving you their metadata. Yeah,
so my role at Pandora, working with labels, is to get content flowing through the label to the listener as quickly as possible. We also have a submission process that's been around forever, and about 4 of us in the curation team will listen to roughly 150 a week, and we accept anywhere from 40 to 50% of those submissions. So any artist can go to submit.pandora.com and submit their music. That site is currently being overhauled because there is a funky quirk, pardon the pun, quirk where it still requires a CD, but the digital submission process is en route. So we have artists that have gone from an indie submission to now headlining big tours. So it's something that we're really proud of, and it's something that we'll continue to do even with the streamlining of the process, is to listen to every record that comes in. I've always wanted to do it almost as an A&R thing. Like, wow, so I have a record label, maybe I should sign this person, but I've not done that. But yeah, it's part of the process that we do, and I don't want to say how many artists it is because I don't know, but it's definitely tens of thousands of artists that are on Pandora strictly by using the submission tool.
Okay. So what we're going to do, because we have a limited amount of time left in this panel, I think we have about 15 minutes or so, is that I'll let Jim talk for about 5 minutes, some overall big picture, connecting the dots kind of comments about the state of data collection in the industry and where coordination opportunities exist. Does that sound okay? And then for folks who would like to address the panel, you can start lining up at the microphones and we'll see how many we can get done before we're done.
Okay, first thing I want to make clear is that there's really 3 key identifiers in the music industry, or that matter for you internationally. The first one I'll mention is the ISRC code, the International Standard Recording Code. And that applies to sound recordings, to individual tracks. And that's very, very important that you get assigned an ISRC code. They're very inexpensive to get, and you need one in order to participate in the global economy in music. The second key code is the ISWC code, and that applies for songwriters and those who have songs for the work. ISWC is the same as the ISRC when it comes to the work. Now, the third code that you need is ISNI. And the ISNI code applies to creative people who work in the industry and who might be referenced with one of the other 2 codes. These 3 are critical to know. Now, you should know that the databases of these codes don't cross-reference. So it would actually be very, very difficult to keep track of every ISRC code that relates to every ISWC code. But it would be relatively trivial to put an ISWC code in for every ISRC, because every sound recording comes from a song, and every song might have many sound recordings. So these are the 3 key identifiers that apply to the music industry: ISRC, ISWC, and ISNI. Now, I know it's fanciful to talk about this as metadata, but I really don't like the term. I don't feel comfortable with it. Metadata means data about data, and I'm thinking we're dealing with data about art or culture. And so I think it needs to be much more expansive than just metadata. I think a good database about art looks like IMDb. If you've ever looked at IMDb, and they have a pro version, you'll even find out the names of the Teamsters who drove some of the trucks, perhaps the people who run the catering company. I think this is a better way to include everything that relates to any claim. And I think claim is the critical word. We're not here to arbitrate or to decide who is exactly right about each thing, but we need to record and enumerate claims so that we can sift through them and we can figure out what's going on. Now, at the root of the problem around data is that this industry sees data as a cost or a risk. Risk in the sense that if you have good data, you might know that you don't have to pay on that song, that it's out of copyright, or that it's not covered here, or that it might steer you around the traditional system. The more you know, the more you might be able to steer around it. That's the risk part. They see it as a cost because, quite simply, they see that it costs them money in order to keep track of data. And of course, then there's the cost of money not going into the black box, into the unattributed income category. There's no better money in this business to receive than unattributed income. And I say that because, hey, it's unattributed. You don't have to share it with anyone. But you probably do have a responsibility to share it with someone. And so that's the worst way for it to arrive in someone's hands if you're an artist or you're someone thinking, I want to get paid. It's for someone else to receive your money in the pile of unattributed income. But that's a very good way to receive money if you are a music publisher or a record company. It almost says with a neon sign, you don't have to share me with anyone else. And so that is something that is very desired. So registries are seen as both costs and risks. I say the answer is to make registration profitable. And I say that without too much concern because if you look at the technology industry sees the registration of individual computers, domains, and networks as a profit center. They make money off registration. Kohlberg Kravitz Roberts recently bought GoDaddy. GoDaddy advertises on the Super Bowl. There is a profit motive flowing through the domain naming system that ensures not only that every idea you ever had that might result in a .com or some other internet name is recorded somewhere, but that you can get answers to your questions about them in single-digit milliseconds, even when you're sitting in an auditorium typing in a URL through a Wi-Fi system. Now, compare that. We think it's a cost or a risk, and they think recordation and enumeration is a profit center. Guess which one works?
Thanks, Jim. We're going to move on to the questions now.
Great, but I'm just going to leave you with this, that if you gave me the choice between making it a requirement that people register and that you make it profitable that people register, I'd take the latter every time because it'll get a lot more stuff registered. And when you see ads on the Super Bowl, you'll know we're doing it right.
Okay, we'll start with the first question over here.
I was wondering what sort of bugs is going on in the data right now where you think data is limited and, could be expanded, or just, stuff that's getting resolved. Yeah, bugs in the data. Or are there bugs? I don't know.
Our problem isn't bugs. It's that we don't have databases at all. I will shock you and tell you that for over 2 decades, we've been giving out ISRC codes. The ISRC registry group has no database of the codes they handed out. They cannot tell you the numbers they gave out and relate them. Am I wrong? No, it's true. And this is shocking that for 20 years you've been paying for codes and they didn't keep track of one of them. So if you said, I've got this record, I need to know the code, they couldn't tell you. And if you gave them the code, they couldn't tell you what record it applies to. No wonder it's not a standard in our industry. We've got to make it a standard in our industry, as solid as a vehicle's identification number or a license plate is, and make sure that the people who collect money follow the rules of the road.
Next question.
This may not be an entirely metadata problem, but I think that it's related. I worked with an attorney last summer that represents artists like the estate of Frank Sinatra, a bunch of classic artists. And something that frustrated and confused him was when, for example, on YouTube, you could search for a Frank Sinatra song. Maybe half the time it would then link to or be associated with his Capitol Records release. And the other times it would be connected to some label we'd never heard of, probably some foreign public domain label, since his songs are in the public domain in Europe. And we didn't know, or a compilation maybe. But usually they were little kind of bootleg names, and we didn't know how that association happened and how to correct it, and what was in place to prevent people from taking credit or claiming copyrights that they don't actually own.
Right. What is to prevent them? I mean, do you know of a registry you trust?
No, I mean, so how did they, how are these companies getting away with getting the copyright just because there's no registry to say
It's a
they're
claim
wrong?
one makes that I have a copyright in a thing. I mean, again, I'm not trivializing it. I think we should have good registries. And I think in the year 2013, it's just outrageous that we don't require registration in some way. But I'm not going to fight that battle. I'm not going to change Bern. And Bern doesn't even have to really be changed in order to require it of your own citizens. But we really don't have good registries of who owns what.
I guess, I'm sorry, to clarify, so in the process of collecting the data, when you upload a song, a sound recording, how does it deter? It's the same
When you
recording.
upload it where? To Napster?
Let's say YouTube.
To YouTube.
How is YouTube's content ID?
They have a content ID system. They record the information.
Why are some of the same recording tagged one album and some of the same recording tagged another album?
It could appear different to the system. I mean, 2 songs at different bit rates, different versions of the song, it comes across as different. But that's why what I'm stressing is that many of the problems our industry has can be solved with a GUID, a globally unique identifier. And just to make that point clearer, if we don't have that doing business with, say, people with different languages and different character sets, we really don't even know what's getting used. I mean, because, even translating languages, let alone the same language. I mean, I've seen the simple phrase Bee Gees expressed about 29 different ways.
So actually, this is an interesting point for Chris and also for Dennis to comment on, because I imagine that you guys have probably talked about within your own work, how do you unify places, information that comes from a lot of different countries or in a lot of different languages?
It's an excellent question, and that's one of exactly the problem is we don't even have ISRC codes, provided to us. So, deficient as though they may be, if we had that, we at least, would have something to start from. So it's a huge problem. There's, we have to. Some of it, frankly, is just gets down to guesswork. I look at a sound recording that might have the same title, and I might know it's one of 3 recordings, and I just have to sometimes give it my best guess. Is it the studio recording? Was it a live recording? Something streamed off of like a unplugged, performance someplace? The truth is we don't know because we don't have the data. I think that's just.
How many tracks do you think you track?
We're tracking right now About 90, almost 90,000 different tracks.
Pandora,
1.3 million.
SoundExchange.
We've distributed money for over 6 million sound recordings.
So we know that Apple has 50 to 55 million tracks in there for sale. And we know that internationally we're talking about probably over 100 million tracks. So just to give you a sense of the dimensions of the problem.
And an increase of about 9 million per year is my understanding.
There you go. 94% of which we're told sell less than 100 copies in a year. 4 million Spotify tracks haven't been played at all. But we do, under copyright, need to take responsibility for granularity. And so we've got 50 to 100 million songs that we're short on.
Another question here?
Yes, sir. I'm more so concerned with the next wave of music, indie music coming out. I'm really not concerned with the majors because it's obvious that they want to keep everything to themselves and they're not really concerned about the whole collective thing. And so when SoundExchange, and I guess this is really for Chris, when SoundExchange reformed, I thought it was actually awesome. As a production company, a small publisher, a lot of the releases that I do, my responsibility is registering, you know, the songs and the records, or I guess the records with SoundExchange. And in focusing on the next wave of music and the indie music, I'm more so concerned of these deals that I'm hearing about with Clear Channel and Big Machine, where they're, you know, they're already starting to try to, you know, pull in these indies to kind of do the same thing that's been going on forever. So I guess as far as SoundExchange is concerned, are you guys doing anything? Are you guys like fighting that, you know, so we can continue to try to do this whole collective thing together? So.
Well, one thing I'll say about that is that SoundExchange is always, we have a statutory mandate to pay the artist separately from the copyright owner, and we collect artist monies directly from the services, or, you know, performance royalties for the artist directly from the services. We pay those monies to the artist directly. So even if a copyright owner has done a direct license deal with a service, there's a good chance we are still collecting the artist portion of that performance royalty and distributing it directly to the artist. That being said, artists have the ability now, have more freedom to choose who they sign their deals with. If you are an artist that is concerned about, you know, a label possibly not protecting your interests and, you know, doing a deal that you wouldn't want to be party to, I would say you have the freedom to take your content to a label that's going to respect that and is going to, you know, let you be remunerated properly for the use of your recorded output. I mean, this is one of the things that I think is great about the statutory license and the way that it's administered, and the freedom that artists have to kind of choose their own destiny now.
Do we have time for another question or comment? One question? All right, this will be the last question, and then we'll also let the panelists answer your question with their last comments.
Yeah, I have a question to Chris and to Dennis. First one is, what actually happens to money that has been collected but not distributed yet because artists didn't register with the societies? So basically, does this money wait for them, or at some point you just like do something else with it? And the follow-up, what about foreign artists? If their music is played in the US, are they actually eligible to receive money? And if yes, on which terms?
So to answer your first question, yes, we do hold money for unregistered artists. Under the statute, we are allowed to, after a certain period of time has gone by from the point of collection of that royalty, to distribute it proportionally among the registrants with SoundExchange. To date, we have never done that. So and it's because we are constantly performing outreach activities to register these artists, to, you know, identify who they are through their labels, through their associations with other artists, anything that we can leverage to potentially identify who the rightful recipients of these royalties are and get that money in their hands. To answer your second question, yeah, international artists and performers can collect money from SoundExchange. There's some nuance there in that artists sometimes will have collection mandates from the performance rights organizations in their home territory that we will may or may not have a reciprocal agreement with to exchange those monies across territorial borders. So depending on that artist's relationship with the PRO in their home territory, it may be something that is not paid directly to the artist, but is paid through the PRO in that home territory if they're a member of that organization.
And the ones who don't have agreements with SoundExchange, I think French, for example, the French society doesn't have an agreement with SoundExchange. So this means that French artists, they can
register with SoundExchange directly.
Directly.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, okay.
In the case of the fund, what happens is there's not a registration, but we end up paying if there's a performance, regardless of the nationality or the territory the performer lives. We will find that person if they're findable, and we'll pay them. So even if they haven't registered, even with the exception, as Chris said, if they're registered with another society, and our situation is almost identical to that. And that we do hold monies. If we can't find them, technically they're retired after a period of 3 years. However, that never is invoked. If somebody comes back, 10 years from now and says we can verify that we're on something we didn't get paid for, we'll pay them. Our goal is to pay the money out. We want to make sure everybody gets paid. Our system is slightly different in that we have what's called a proxy system because we can't dial down quite as far as SoundExchange, can in terms of how many recordings. So we have to have a universe of recordings. So if it's a covered recording and the money is set aside, regardless of how long a period it takes, if somebody comes forward and can identify that performance and we can verify it, then they get paid.
So I'm going to give Mike a second to say any last words, and then we'll give the absolute last word to Jim.
Thanks. So I didn't get a chance to say too much because no one wanted to ask me any questions. So if you want to ask me a question, I'll be up at the top of the room in a few minutes, I suppose, and happy to talk to anyone that has questions.
I'll just say that the way to solve this problem is to create a wholesale registry that encourages retail activity at its edge, that makes it profitable to sign people up and register them, much as does the domain name system. If it's profitable to register people, it's going to happen. If it's viewed as a cost or a risk, it's not. Let's make it profitable, then it'll occur.
Let's thank our panelists for a great discussion.